Well, top US law officials are promising an investigation of unprecedented scope to locate and charge perpetrators of the Capitol attack. At a briefing in Washington, D.C. today, they've described efforts the equivalent of an international counter-terrorism operation, already involving 100,000 digital tips. The acting US attorney in Washington, Michael Sherwin, says 170 cases are already underway, some involving what he called the most heinous acts. As evidence mounts that authorities were aware of possible violence, including via 2 FBI reports warning of war and blowing up buildings, Sherwin stressed that Americans should expect the most serious of charges to result. Fred Lawrence, thank you so much for joining us today. First, on today's developments, the FBI and Department of Justice say that they've got a massive dragnet nationally to look for the individuals involved in the Capitol attack. They're laying charges. They've got grand juries sitting. They say they're looking at significant felony cases tied to sedition and conspiracy. Can you put that in context for us? How would you characterise the scope and scale of what happened at the Capitol, but also this investigation now?
To start with the most obvious, but it has to be said, we have never seen anything like this in the history of the United States of America. So let me flesh that out a little bit. The last time that the United States Capitol building was under attack was from the British in the War of 1812. Literally. The last time we have had this kind of broad-based discussion of sedition was during the American Civil War in the 1860s. Since then, clearly there have been police actions against groups that would try to use violence against the government, but to have this kind of a widespread project, 50 state capitals and the United States Capitol allegedly being under attack, plans for attack coming up, unprecedented. And so far, you've noticed I haven't added the last and in some ways the most significant factor, incited by the President of the United States. So there really aren't words to describe how much we are in uncharted waters here.
What's your prediction about how these cases will unfold as authorities pursue those who attacked the Capitol? Because, as you say, there are these incredibly dire threats still hanging over the whole of the United States. There are people, we are told, planning murderous attacks in the coming week heading towards Joe Biden's inauguration. Can the authorities effectively carry out their inquiries and deliver justice in the midst of all of this?
There's a very interesting irony here. Technology has made it easier to organize these kind of campaigns in a way that could never happen before. One person with a computer can reach hundreds, thousands of people and be in touch with them. On the other hand, for the very same reason, it makes it much easier for law enforcement to focus in. Law enforcement has ways of knowing what's going on in these discussions. And so what is truly shocking is that there were things that were known about the Capitol, and the ball was dropped in the worst possible way. But I don't think that's going to happen again, and I think you're going to see tremendous focus on all of our various state capitals and the United States Capitol. You know, I live about 5 miles from the Capitol building. Last Wednesday, afternoon and evening, I could hear the sirens. They were completely outgunned and out of control. There are going to be 15,000 National Guardsmen surrounding the Capitol at the time of the inauguration and probably from now till then. So I think we're going to see a very different role of law enforcement investigating, preventing, and when necessary, prosecuting.
I want to get to the role of the president in a moment, but one of the issues, of course, is that Donald Trump has weakened so many elements of the edifice that is United States government, including Department of Justice. Would you be confident that there is the kind of leadership that's needed to carry out these investigations and prosecutions?
In some ways, the most impressive piece of the story of what's gone on in this country over the last couple of months is that it is precisely not the leaders who have kept this country safe. I know we're talking about the criminal piece of this, but go back to the elections just for a moment. There are people who have jobs that, frankly, you and I probably didn't even know existed, who have been the heroes of this story. who count the votes, who kept track of the votes, some of whom got hauled into the Oval Office and said to the President of the United States, the most powerful man in the world, "I'm sorry, Mr. President, we can't do it that way. You're wrong. We have to go with the facts." So now coming to your question about law enforcement, the actual cops on the beat, the assistant U.S. attorneys, the assistant district attorneys, the FBI field officers, these people are professional. These people, by the way, took the same oath that the president did to protect and defend the constitutional laws of the United States against all enemies, foreign and domestic. I took that oath myself when I became an assistant U.S. attorney in the 1980s. It sounds corny, I know that, but these people take this oath seriously, and I think they're really being put to the test right now.
So, to the president, do you think Donald Trump should be charged for his role in stoking this moment?
Charged in the sense of impeachment, yes. Charged in the sense of consideration by the vice president and the cabinet under the 25th Amendment of the United States Constitution to be removed from the office for being psychologically unsound and incapable of performing his duties as president, yes. Criminal case is more complicated. Permit me to sort of go under the hood with you a little bit on a little bit of criminal law doctrine. For a case to be made of conspiracy or for incitement of this kind, it's a kind of complicity argument that you aided and abetted. That requires two different levels of intent, the intent to aid and abet and the intent to do the crime. Did President Trump have the intent to aid and abet getting that crowd all riled up? Absolutely. Did he actually have the intent for them to break in and to do damage and to do harm and, in fact, to do deadly harm? That's going to be harder to prove. So I'm a big fan of not asking the wrong question, and I fear that asking the criminal question could get the wrong answer. We should be able to say more about our president than that he's not guilty of a crime beyond a reasonable doubt. That should not be our standard for a president. Our standard for a president should be the kind of person of decency and dignity and integrity to do the job. He has forfeited that, and therefore I think we are talking about impeachment. We are talking about 25th Amendment. I'm less sure we're talking about a criminal conviction.
And so where does this land then? Because there will be a sense of inadequacy, won't there, about the process if Donald Trump is not held to account? I mean, surely that's a problem.
It would be a big problem. On the other hand, keep in mind that, again, we're in uncharted waters. We've only impeached two presidents in our history, three, if you include President Trump himself. This will be the first time it's ever happened twice. It would be the first time it continued past somebody was in office, but it can take place after somebody's in office because the sanction of an impeachment is not only removal from office, but determination that the person may not seek office again. Constitutionally, having served only one term, he could run again. So the purpose of an impeachment, even after he leaves office, would be to deprive him of the ability to serve a second term. So there still is an aspect of that. I also would not underestimate the political harm that's been done to him and his whole movement. He certainly has loyal supporters within the Republican Party, but there are many within the Republican Party now who are very wary of being associated with him. It's interesting to watch many of the moderate Republicans and even some of the conservative Republicans starting to distance themselves from him. So as that continues, there may be a price that he pays politically as well. But, you know, not every question gets answered with a criminal case. Only in a totalitarian society does every important question get answered in a criminal case. I always told my students in criminal law that there are certain situations where you're entitled to think somebody is a jerk, but you don't have to put them in jail. So in this case, if what comes out of this is a sense that this is a man who could not and did not function properly as a president, that's a pretty serious sanction all by itself.
And you've written about hate and punishing hate. On that wider issue of what's roiling your country, is it about hate, and is there a healing process, I guess, around that hate to be undertaken once we're past this more urgent moment?
This is the most important question of all. When I wrote my first articles about hate crimes and then my book about hate crimes, it was my dearest hope that it would become obsolete by now. But it is far from obsolete. If anything, it is more urgent than ever. Issues of race in this country, issues of treatment of immigrants in this country are devastating. And it is an embarrassment for me as an American to know that the world is watching America behave this way. So there is an absolute need for a healing process to take place. And it is hard for me to see how that happens in the short run. The anger, the distrust is at such a high level, really like nothing I've ever seen in my lifetime. On the other hand, you go back a century and a half, and we did have essentially two nations within our nation fighting a war with each other. 600,000 Americans were killed in the American Civil War, more than any of our other wars, most of our other wars combined. And yet we managed to come back together. So I'm hopeful in the long run that will happen. And I'll also say, and this is not a political statement, I think this is just an assessment of character. I think that President Biden is made of the kind of stuff that gives rise to healing. There is a decency about him. There is a dignity to him. So I'm hopeful on that score. But I have to say that I am not naive in thinking that in the short run there's going to be healing that comes out of this. I think this distrust has got a ways to go, and I'm hopeful in the long run that we turn around, not just for our sake, but if I may be so presumptuous, because of the impact we have on the world. I'll never forget a conversation I had recently with a friend of mine from South Africa who lived in the United States during the early 1980s, and it was a formative experience for him watching a Republican president, Ronald Reagan, and a Democratic Speaker of the House, Tip O'Neill, work very closely together. And he said to me, "You have no idea the impact this is having on all of us around the world." And I'm sure he's right. So I think we have a role to play, not just to heal ourselves, but I think we still have a role to play as a model to heal ourselves for the rest of the world.
Well, it's a long road, though, isn't it? I mean, we're seeing, last week we saw people carrying a noose to the Capitol and wearing T-shirts saying Camp Auschwitz. I mean, gosh, what a huge task.
Well, it is a huge task. And at the end of the day, we've been talking about impeachment or constitutional operations. We've been talking about criminal investigations and criminal prosecutions. At the end of the day, that's not where the real healing is going to take place. It's going to have to take place through how people treat each other and how people respect each other. And that is a gargantuan task that reaches out to all parts of society. And right now, to be perfectly honest, I have a hard time seeing that happen. There was a time when people disagreed on politics and then they went out for a drink afterwards. But we're at a stage now where people who disagree on politics stop being friends. This is devastating. You have to go back a long time in this country to find a president whom almost the entire country simply would have said, I voted for him, I voted against him, but that's my president. And that we have been divided in this way now going on decades. And that is very dangerous for a democracy.
Frederick Lawrence, very good to speak with you. Thank you so much for your time today.
Pleasure being with you.
Frederick M. Lawrence is also author of Punishing Hate